Hey there, Crystal Summer Bear Jones here from Wedding Secrets and Heirloom Photography. I'm still getting used to the Jones part. Professionally, I usually use the name Crystal Summer Bear because it's the name associated with my business, but it is technically Crystal Summer Bear Jones now. So I wanted to come today and chat with you before we even get into the venues. We really have to chat about guest list. And this is a really tricky and hard subject for a lot of people. So people don't want to hurt other people's feelings, generally speaking. At the same time, you really want to only have people there that you really want there. You don't want to have drama at your wedding or people there that maybe don't really want to be there, but they showed up for obligation reasons. So before we even think about choosing a venue that works for you, let's chat about choosing the guests that work for you. So for us, I had a couple people, I'm not going to lie, that I invited that I was happy that did not show up. Now, I invited them knowing that they probably would not show up, but they felt good that I invited them. I would have been cool if they'd shown up, to be honest, but I knew, and if they had shown up, maybe they wouldn't have gotten along with some other people that were there. And so I knew that by them not coming, things were a little bit less dramatic. Because that's another thing when you're talking about a wedding, especially a wedding when you're talking about families that are divorced or mixed or whatever that is, it can be a little complicated. And as it was last year, and it was the election and everything, one of the rules I had was no politics. No one could talk politics at the wedding. Because I knew no matter what side people fell on, it was going to be split 50-50. So luckily that it did not come up at the wedding. I found out later on that apparently there were some conversations had outside of the wedding that people didn't like. But as long as it wasn't at the wedding and it didn't cause drama, that's all I cared about. So for us, I'm a little bit older, so I really thought that all of these people, I'm a very active in the community. In fact, had I known that so few people were going to show up at my wedding, I probably would have invited more people, because I am very active in the community. I have a lot of friends. I have a lot of professional friends and long-term friends, and I really didn't want the guest list to go, the actual people at the wedding to go over about 150 price wise, because it can get really expensive. And even with our caterer, who was very reasonably priced, it was a good combination of reasonably priced food and very delicious food. They only got one thing wrong, and I didn't even bring it up with them, but I was kind of upset. But again, that's something the planner probably should have fixed, and I should have never even known about it. But again, that's another story. All these things are interconnected, and how vendors work together are very interconnected, and we're going to talk about that too here in a different video. But for right now, we're going to chat about the guest list. So the most expensive thing at a wedding is the guests. It's the food for the guests. It's the drinks for the guests. And that's going to take up the most. So for us, I want to say for about 90 guests, after food and drink and cake, and we had an ice cream check come, which is a lot of fun too. After all is said and done, we spent probably about $12,000 on food, drinks, cake, and ice cream for 90 guests. And that might be a little on the high side, but just to, and they didn't drink all the drinks. We still have drinks left, actually, to this day, 7 months later. But that's about what it cost. So that number being in your head, that was on the low end. So when we were looking at the cost for catering for about 120 guests, which is what we thought were going to be there, we had some people suggesting that it was going to be closer to the $30,000 mark. And what is that? That's quite expensive. So, well, you're not paying for the food. Yes, you're paying for the food, but the actual food portion of it is like minuscule. You're paying for the people that are there, the service. And I'm going to get a little bit more comfortable in this chair. You're paying for the service. You're paying for, um, the team that's going to be there, even that's going to flip. Like if you have your reception, your reception, your ceremony in the same location, they'll flip. So there's a team associated with there. And of course, in California, the cost of labor is higher, and even at minimum wage, you're still talking probably about $20 an hour per person. And there's going to be a team of at least 10 people there, and they're going to be there probably at least 5 to 6 hours. So it does add up, and realistically, they're probably paying them closer to $25 an hour, but they're charging out probably closer to like $60 an hour, because you have to cover the insurance, or the company has to cover the cost of having an employee. Having an employee costs more money than just an hourly wage. So when you're looking at the cost of the caterer, and this is getting a little bit into the catering side of it, most of it is going to be labor. And then their profit. I mean, they are a business, they have to make money. So you're not just paying for the cost of food and the labor, you're also paying for their talent and livelihood, and so that they can continue having a business. So they need to be able to make a profit. So that's one of the things you have to remember when you're looking at these prices. It's not just the cost of food. Yes, you could have a potluck wedding. Absolutely. I have seen plenty of potluck weddings that were very great. I've seen plenty of food truck weddings, and the food was fantastic. I've been to weddings and photographed weddings where people brought in Costco food. So there are ways around it. Generally speaking, those weddings were friends, and I, would photograph the wedding for next to nothing or nothing when I was first starting out. It's been a while since I've done one of those weddings, but that is one way to go. That's a whole nother subject, and we're going to talk about the pros and cons of doing it that way versus hiring a professional. Well, getting back to the guest list, the most expensive part of the guest is the food that they consume. And also, some venues might charge based on how many guests you have there, because that can determine how many hands they need to have on to be there the day of. But aside from the cost, you really want to go with the feeling. How do you feel about the people that are going to be at your wedding? There were a number of people I really wanted to be there that weren't there, and I was very sad that they didn't come. And it was actually very difficult for me. July, when we got the final numbers, I was in tears, actually, because there were people who didn't show up to my wedding who I was just devastated. They were family members who were really close, and they didn't come. And then there were others where I kind of thought they wouldn't, mostly because they just don't like, unless they're going to Mexico or going on a trip or something, they generally just don't leave the confines of where they live. And that's sad. But it is the way it is. And then I knew that because we were having the wedding on a Friday, that some people just couldn't get out of work. I had one of my family members who really did want to come, but like she just really could not get out of work. And so, it is what it is. It happens. But when you're in the emotion of planning the wedding, it can get really emotional and hurtful when you think people are going to be there that they don't actually show up. And then, of course, you have people who can't show up last minute because they got sick. I had a whole family, actually one whole table did not show up because so half of them got COVID. The other literally just didn't show. No call, no show. If they had been my employee, I might have fired them. But definitely fired them as a friend. And that was an invite that it was the one invite where I knew I should never have invited them in the first place, and I wish I hadn't, because they absolutely have no regard for anybody else's feelings. I'd known them basically their entire lives, and they were a friend of the family. Obviously, I'm not saying names, not that they would ever watch this video, but out of respect, I'm not saying names. But that will happen. where there will be someone where you invite because they're somebody you've known for a long time and you just kind of feel obligated to invite them. And in this particular case, I actually thought that they had been kind of getting more and more mature. And then when push came to shove, it was literally like if somebody else hadn't told me that they weren't going to be there, I would have set the table for them thinking they were going to be there and they wouldn't have showed up. That's really rude. And unfortunately, that does happen. And one of my clients and friends, because I invited a couple of my clients to my wedding, and one of them, the one set, a couple could not come because her husband got COVID. And she felt so bad because at her wedding, she had, I think she said 2 to 3 tables that just literally did not show up at all. No, no RSVP, no, they just didn't show up. So that can happen. And it is rare for that to happen these days at that level, but it can happen. And one thing to maybe reiterate when you are reaching out is, number one, I had a RSVP list attached to my email list. So it might be worth setting up, like purchasing an Active Campaign or GoDaddy, or having your wedding planner or someone set it up, a system where people can RSVP and then you can communicate mass with them in a mass email. And just reiterate again, please, if you are not going to be there, please let us know no more than like 2 weeks ahead of time if possible. But even if it's a last minute emergency, please let us know. Because if you appeal to people's heartstrings, most of the time they're going to let you know. Like I said, this was one person out of all the people I invited who just didn't have any kind of respect. And I should have known better. I shouldn't have invited them. That's on me. And so if there's somebody like that where you're really like, you know what, they're probably not going to show up, or they're not even going to tell me if they're not going to show up, don't invite them unless it's going to cause a mass issue. If it's like you're going to get in a fight with somebody if you don't invite them, then go ahead and invite them. Just assume that they're not going to show up. But generally speaking, you want to invite people that you feel a connection to. And we went through and I just did a mass writing down, like brainstorm the list. And then of course I was thinking of people later on, like weeks later. I was like, oh man, I totally forgot. So I actually added people to the invite list later on. Especially when I got some no's back early on, which I got some initial no's, which then opened up for me being able to invite more people. So that is one thing. Now, I will say that statistically speaking, when you are younger and you're dealing with a crowd of people who don't have a family, you're going to have a much higher turnout rate. So if you invite 200 people, you're probably going to get about 150 people there, or maybe even closer to that 200 mark. As you get married in your 30s, then people that you invite might have families. And so it might be harder for them to get there, or their kids might be sick. So things like that happen, things come up. And so the older you get, the less likely people are to show up. And then I think once you hit, like in the late 40s, 50s, when people, because I actually have photographed couples that got married in their late 40s and early 50s. And a lot of people would show up for that because their kids are grown. And so this is a great time for them to connect with people they haven't seen in a long time. And so it's just kind of like in your 20s, yeah, everybody's going to show up. They're going to want to party. Then when you hit your late 20s, 30s, then the number of people who you invite start coming down as far as who's actually going to show this. It starts coming down, and then it starts going back up in your late 40s and 50s. And so that is kind of the trend. And it can be painful sometimes when people you really want to be there don't show up and they don't give you a reason why they're not showing up. But you know what? 90 people showed and had the best time. And what was awesome is that I actually got to spend time with almost everybody. There were still a few people who I didn't get to spend a lot of time with. But we actually did a rehearsal dinner, and I invited other people that weren't even a part of the wedding to the rehearsal dinner. And the next day we had a brunch all at the same venue. That's why I love this venue. And the reason they did this for us was because we did go ahead and rent the big house for 2 nights. So, and it was August. It wasn't busy. They had no other weddings. They only do one wedding a weekend. And so I was able to get that deal. That's not something they probably do during their busier months, especially not in September and October. But, they were happy to help me out because, again, I was kind of purchasing their biggest package, so to speak. So it was a great way for me to connect with a lot of people, and it mostly was my side. Yeah, my husband's side of the family did not. They were there for the rehearsal and the wedding, but they did not come for the next day. And sometimes that'll happen as well. And for him, most of all of his invite list was family. He didn't really have friends he wanted to invite because he had done a lot of moving around and had lost contact with a lot of his friends, which can happen as well. Sometimes you're going to have one person who has a bigger guest list than the other person. And so this is a lot to keep in mind, but when it comes down to it, sure, you're going to have a few people who you might invite that you don't really want to invite, but you're doing that out of respect. And that's okay. But if there's anybody who you're like, well, I really just don't want them to be there, or you think they might cause drama, just nix them and just blame it on the venue. If they ever ask and be like, I am so sorry, we literally we had to cut it somewhere. We'd love to have you over sometime and get together with you. But we just were limited on how many people we could invite for the venue. And cost wise too, is that a lot of times guests, especially if they haven't been married before or they haven't been a part of a wedding in a long time, don't understand how expensive each guest actually costs. It's a lot. So they just have to, once you explain that to people, they will be understanding. So I could go on and on about guest lists, and it's something that's very personal to each person. So you really do want to figure out a range. So when we went looking for our venues, although I was inviting 200 people, I was looking for venues that could comfortably hold 150 because I knew I didn't want anybody to be squished or like barely being able to walk around tables. I also knew I wanted it outdoors because it's August. It's beautiful, especially in the Central Coast area. It's beautiful, gorgeous night. It's very cool, like that perfect kind of temperature. Not too hot, not too cold. So hopefully that helps you out, and I will be here the next video. We'll be chatting about how I chose my venue after I had my date and I had an approximate guest list, and how we did that in one weekend. I think it was 2 weekends actually. We did it in 2 weekends, and it's a lot of fun, but I'll share that with you next time. All right. Feel free to ask any questions. Please subscribe, share with anybody you think this would be helpful towards and for, not towards. And yeah, I will see you in the next video.